Yeah. Hello to folks watching on the live stream on YouTube. We're about to start in a minute. We're here in the Arts Cafe of the Kelly Writers House, but I'm addressing the YouTube people. Welcome. It's 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. You're all over the place. Whenever it is, evening, late at night, morning, welcome. Lily Applebaum, calling Lily Applebaum, is going to be, using your device here, is going to be following the YouTube chat. And we would love for you to send greetings to Caroline, but also maybe ask a question, which Lily can convey to us. Okay? So we are here. Hey, Henry. We are here in the Arts Cafe at the Kelly Writers House, actually in person. And the great, brilliant, eminent Caroline Bergvall has come all the way from London to be with us for a session with our students yesterday and a reading last night, and now this conversation.
Yep.
So let's begin by putting our hands together for Caroline Bergvall.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We ran you through your paces yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
But
Really
here,
wonderful.
bright
But
and early, we're ready to go.
yeah, oh, yeah. Jet lagged and ready to go. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
But it was a very energizing day and evening yesterday, so of course that brings up a lot of great energies.
We feel the same way about it. It's very energizing. This is symbolic. I'm just going to put it down. The kind of guy who would wear a mask if required. Well, we're going to have about an hour, and I can't wait. It'll go really fast, but there's so many topics that we've been talking about in the last 24 hours, but also in our correspondence, we've been talking about what might be called reformist or radical pedagogy, and I know that's going to come up too, so I look forward to it. We also have an audience here, and as I mentioned, on YouTube, so we'll turn to questions maybe about halfway through. I wondered if we could start. I wonder if you would be willing to read a paragraph from Drift, the one on page 149. This will be our way of getting into the topic of being at sea and of drifting and all kinds of really great, crucial things. It's a passage, Caroline, I think, that is anthemic for the whole piece. So, yeah?
Yep. Do you want me to read that section?
Yeah, please.
Opacity, as some sort of compositional as much as existential reality, yields tough lessons about knowledge and applying one's skills, tough lessons about investigation, tough lessons about not looking too soon for the surf and the break. Being lost had shut down the field of thinking, of sensing, and choosing one's tracks. It left no choice. No illumination, no guiding lines, just to draw lines and insist and push on through the seasickness and the confusing solitude of desire. This is another kind of separation. It arises not from the past, but from what's to come, not from the familiar, but from the unimagined, the potential arrival. Desire's opacity is the longing that gives the courage to depart, to set out. It lends the harshest sweetness to the most total risk. It's as opaque as it is luminous and precious. The desired intensity of its luminosity always much depends on the political times one lives in and how much darkness is imposed as light. To measure the light in order to make out other objects in the night, how much freedom can be retained and explored from dwelling in the dark, how much work can be released when making it out into the light, how much release when making out the nature of darkness and light and walking into it.
That's amazing. There's so much there. Opacity as a compositional reality. That sounds so Joan Ritalikian or something. Our normal sense of opacity, routine sense of opacity, is that it's like fog and not really desired. But if we are lost in such opacity, it turns out to be a harsh sweetness. Or a sweetness eventually, but however harsh.
Yeah.
So you've turned that into something that we have to be in the dark, and we will get to the light if we push through the dark.
We are in the dark. We are in the dark even about ourselves. So there's always a process of investigation of oneself or of one's surroundings, if one is interested in that, or if one wishes to think in broader terms about oneself, one's place in the world. So the darkness is a sort of given, it's a social given. The opacity is a social given. Blind spots, impasses, all these can, But in relation to drift, perhaps here, opacity here has a very sort of strong or nearly a strict definition, and then I apply it to different methodologies throughout the book. But one of the definitions in the work is when I apply to the poetics of this work, when I look at the report of the Left to Die boat case, and then I apply or I think through the investigatory methods of forensic architecture, the social scientists at the University of Warwick, since then they've done an enormous amount of work. Their methods is really to turn against itself surveillance, digital mapping, surveillance technology, to try and investigate really where, in a way, you couldn't find traces. So what they do with the Left to Die boat case, this drowning, is that they manage to trace the trajectory of the little Zodiac boat, and manage to get some testimonies from the survivors, and slowly piece it together into basically they call this new sea that they have. Then you can't find materials in the sea really when it's floating around, and they call it a new type of sea. So it's sea made of matter and of media. So by using this both an understanding of the matter of the sea, the element of the sea, and then at the same time contemporary technologies and human witnesses, they managed to piece together the whole narrative that is strong enough for them to put up a report to say there was abuse of power here, there was non-assistance of person in danger, and then take it to court. For me, that way of breaking through opacity by using all these extremely high-tech, militaristic, also for civilian Coast Guard use, methods against themselves, or, towards a narrative that was kept hidden or wanted to be kept hidden and forgotten. That, for me, is a way of breaking through that opacity, the way they work it, if you like.
It's a radical revaluation of being lost at sea.
Yeah.
Tough lessons about not looking too soon for the surf and the break. I take it that the surf and the break is a sign that you are close to the coastline, potentially. So don't look too soon. That goes back to the seafarer.
Exactly.
Right.
And it goes back to this idea of this investigation I was mentioning at the beginning. They do it through these technologies and the modelings that they do. Poetically, the way I do it in Drift as well is through slow investigations of the seafarer, so poetic sort of translation or transhistoric, that is a way of trying to grapple with the opacity of a text that I can't read. It's in Old English and I can't read it. Why do I choose that? What am I going to do with this? And then trying to take that place of ignorance and then see, from that place of ignorance, of opacity, how do I build up into a place of potential reading, and what in the end am I reading? And then the other thing here is the story of desire, which is also then how do you, when you come to desire, what does that do to your self-identity and to the encounter with the other? And especially important for me is this whole idea of the queer encounter. And so how do you set up lines of connection that cannot be familial or social in the way they are usually understood? You have to create other lines in order to move out of that now there's a strong existence of queer history and queer culture, but really many parts of the world there still isn't, and is still very much at risk. So how do you then create lines of connection, lines of history that can take you out of that an opacity where you are willed, or culture wills you to stay in that darkness? And how do you then create lines of connection? So it's about poetics of relays.
Right.
What forensic architecture does is a relay of methodologies, and then I look at it in relation to poetics of relays in relation to, for example, this work and all the things that are involved in it.
It presents a theory of translation, Caroline, that accepts a certain amount of linguistic fog.
Yep.
Right? So the poem becomes, Drift and all of your work, becomes a text that does what it says. is foggy. It accepts the fogginess of that translation since you're wandering darkly into a language you don't understand deliberately. Most traditional translators would not do that.
Yes.
And you make that an ethics.
Yes.
That's quite a trick at the end there, making it an ethics.
Yes. Well, because I think it can. In this project, it led to that, perhaps because of what it demanded of me poetically, and then also because of what is happening with the current contemporary crossings at sea. So you called on, in what way are you then called on to witness this as a poet as well? So those questions were asking themselves to me. But otherwise, you're right. And it was sort of, it started from the letter thorn, and I talk about this in a few places. The letter thorn, which disappeared from the Middle English alphabet, due apparently to a printing error from in Germany. Like, they didn't have that letter. That could be wrong, but if I remember right, that's what happened. And so basically, there was a total reduction by at least one letter.
I don't know if Zach can zoom in. How good are you at zooming in, Zach? So there's Caroline playing with the thorn and making it foggy, if I may.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I wanted
Not at all. Yeah.
And this becomes not just an ethics and an aesthetic, but liberatory. There's a hint of that here, and then, of course, in Alisoun Sings, that's a big part of it. Liberatory, how much freedom can be retained and explored from dwelling in the dark? How much freedom? Paradoxically, right? Counterintuitively.
When I think for that, again, for me, I moved back into materials.
Yeah.
And thinking about Michel de Soto, I wrote a piece around Michel de Soto's ideas of indiscrete ghosts. Indiscrete ghosts are traces of voices that have been sort of willed disappeared out of documents. And you have, for example, Nobeze Philippe Zong is a good way of how do you then go and get at another reality.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, for me, whether that whole idea then of the ethics or the sort of looking for freedom through an investigation that can release the voices you're looking for. Or you might not wish that they were there, but there they were. But at least you have them there. Right. Seems to me to be, it becomes a very important piece in your own collective, in your own social history, in your own personal history. So in that sense, there is a sense of positive, liberatory acceptance of the process that's demanded, if you like.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
So I see in this passage a hint at, it's obviously about moving from dark to light, so yes, it's positive. But a hint at what eventually happens in the section called Declaration in Alisoun Sings, which I hope, if the structure works out, that we will end with.
Great.
Part of what you read last night at the end, sort of whispering to me that it would be good to end with something up because there's so much darkness. So this book we think of as dark in the sense of sad and grim, but in this passage, how much freedom can be retained and explored from dwelling in the dark? How much work can be released, including this work, your work, when making it out into the light? How much release when making out the nature of darkness and light and walking into it? There's a glow there. That's liberatory.
Yeah. You stand in a dark, it's very difficult now to find completely dark places. You got to go, outside of urban areas and even further out. Right. But if you stand in the dark long enough, and I certainly remember that very strongly from in Norway, in skiing in the winter, and suddenly it gets dark. And so instead of turning on your torchlight.
Wait, did you just say skiing in the winter and it's
in Norway? Yes, so it's a bit of a gap.
You've been hanging around in Norway lately, I guess.
No, but just childhood and and I did during lockdown.
It's clearly a memory.
Yes, it is absolutely a memory. You're right, because I said it just like that as my first example. because
scary.
But because if you then turn on your lights, your little torch lights, to look for the tracks, because it suddenly got dark, because it gets dark really early. If you want me to continue on the
I'm really interested in this biographical thing.
Then suddenly you don't see anything, because you can only see that very, very narrow field of the light. You remove your light, you wait at 3 minutes, and suddenly you can start to discern outlines. There's a bit of that as well.
Yeah.
You can, if you just stop, take the time, dare to stay in the darkness, and that can be used in so many different metaphorical ways, then there will be outlines that you can then potentially move towards or work with. So.
Harsh sweetness, dark to light. Got to go from dark to light if you want the harsh sweetness. Your writing, you declared back in a piece called About Foam a long time ago that the kind of writing you were interested in was foamic. I mean, that's what I drew from it anyway.
Right.
Foamic. Isn't that cool? I wonder if you would be willing. I bet you haven't read About Foam in a long time.
Yeah, I didn't even remember it was in the
Maybe
book
you've
until you told me that.
Oh
it was
no!
in the book.
So it's clearly not anthemic. It's clearly not the most important thing you've ever written. But I'm taking it as an ars poetica, and I'm the host. So
yeah, absolutely. And also, to be totally honest, it made me remember that initially I thought it was going to be the title of the book. So it was at a time,
one time
super important, but now I have no idea why.
So
really.
here we are in 2022, and I'm asked. Well, we're about to find out.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to read About Foam. It's not that long, and then I'd like to talk about it. One question will be like, what the hell is foamic? What are all these things? Pumice and I don't know, Proust. What do all these things have in common? I mean, we've already sort of talked about it because there's a certain amount of fog and opacity here. But okay, so here's About Foam.
Okay.
And this is the first recording, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's
For the
in
record.
fact, it's been unearthed from its own records. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
It's not that long.
It's not that long. Okay.
Yeah, it's up to you, though, of course.
Okay, About Foam. A paradoxical pleasure is both solid nor liquid that can be wet, dry, hard, soft, expansive, changeable. An intricate and hollow polymer network is energy transport at its finest, a compound structure of gas, nor bubbles, nor fans. Once hardened, it can be tough to break. What binds? A gel, for instance, can envelop like an elastic skin. It can be prodded, distorted, pushed about, yet will bounce back and hold its shape. Under greater surface tension, it breaks into liquid, starts to flow. A resilient, responsive substance is mysterious, swift to move, ever present in all that is cellular, and delivers a shake-up. It supports the many invisible synthetic demands of industry-dependent living, from insulants to binding agents. It has naturally assisted in the solidification of soap, the rising of bread, egg whites, and soufflés since the 17th century. The old Pond's pumice stone works on hard calluses. Once exploded, it can be hard as ash. The skeletal containers of dead sponges were used by Romans for brushes and combs and for cups. Proust's memory work is foamic, in a firm-lined room. That is super interesting. A sudden firming from the mouth, for instance, is the warning of miles of a thick, sluggish matter heaped along coastlines or bubbling up, obstructing the flow of vast industrial evacuation conduits. Matter turns unwelcoming, seemingly unrecognizable. A persistent reactivity to events in its surroundings acts on a profound imbalance, the sign of a system being worked beyond capacity. Foams everywhere, like the letter E, down to the alveolar structure.
That's
Some things
remarkable.
make sense,
Did it all start coming back to you?
Some things make sense, yeah. But,
I intend to use alveolar. Did I pronounce that right?
I don't know.
Alveolar.
Alveolar, I think is
it's an adjective describing partly the tiny lung sacs and partly stuff that goes on in the jaw and the mouth. So it's foamic. But wow, I'm going to use that word once a day.
Yeah.
Because it is like nobody knows what the fuck it means.
And from that perspective, it's great. You know,
No, totally.
Especially for poetics. I mean, it's sort of. But you know, when I read it now, it reminds me a bit of Ponge, Francis Ponge.
Yeah.
The way he would sort of set up his poetics, looking at objects and materials in the world as ways, you know, as metaphors for his poetics, actually, and for
you did it
observation
there.
in the world. Yeah.
So it's not. Well, I'm going to overstate it and then just ask for your reaction.
Okay.
This is a founding aesthetic for you. That is to say, so much of what you're writing later in this book and in Drift and in your other work is about seeking something that seems to most people to be hard and fixed and materially stable, and finding gel-like, more liquid. Pumice is like, it's almost like coral, It's got all that. It's
Volcanic,
alveolar. It's
yeah.
alveolar, right?
Yeah, exactly, it is.
And of course, Proust sitting in a foam-lined
Yes.
room is also alveolar.
Yes.
This is really cool, and this there's so much of the foam. I heard drift in here, right? The stuff, the foam that comes to the
Yes.
coastline, which
Yes.
is so. Is that
Yes.
an overreading?
No, but it's just, it's difficult for me to put my mind to the term itself. So I have to look at it in a Ponge way, thinking, well, this is a metaphor for the poetic process.
Sure.
And with my accent, actually, when I say foam, I know it sounds
What
like
accent?
form. Well, my non-accent, you know, my yeah.
The way you speak.
The way I speak, thank you. So
What,
yes,
what were you saying about foam?
no, what I wanted
with
to
your
say
accent?
was perhaps this whole idea of then, it's not liminal, but it is sort of intangible, and it's also, it's a reactive process. The foam is also reactive. So from that point of view, there's some definitely very interesting correlations with the way I enjoy poetic practice and the way it's often done in response to, but also this idea of imbalance. So what are the materials that indicate profound imbalance, and therefore what do we then do
Yes.
to perhaps correct that imbalance?
Right.
And you know, the horrible foam we see along you know, the coastlines, and you know, that is sort of extremely a powerful image of our reality. And then what does one do, even on a smaller scale, if you like, because these are big industrial environmental issues, but on the scale of poetics, and you know, how does one address questions of imbalance? And that could be about fixity. It could be, that's also when we talk about
And narrowness.
exactly, you know, and how you keep opening this idea of knowledge. You know, what type of knowledge do we need, and what type of, especially perhaps coming out of lockdown, you know, I think many of us are changed by that as well. So how do we then take that on, you know, when we can, and then move it on elsewhere?
So it retroactively, or you know, in the wrong chronological direction, gave me a way to read the idea of drift, because both Drift and Alisoun Sings are seeking strategies and tools for militating against the narrowness that fixes things, such as the gendering that Alisoun and Caroline in that book are. You're trying to make fluid something that some people see as solid, and alveolar becomes a metaphor, Ponge-like.
Yeah.
So it kind of predates this.
Yeah. Yeah, it works very well, the way you describe it and bring it up. It's sort of talking about, looking at it and talking about it, I can see why it's there.
Yeah.
And I can also see why I forgot about it, because really it is a little knot,
An
isn't it?
etude, a
It's a
practice.
little, yeah, exactly. It's a little sort of, it's an added little tool, or a
Yeah.
little added
Yeah.
little metaphor, or,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So, but
Well,
useful today.
Thank you
know,
for tolerating that look back at a minor piece in an old book.
No, that's great. That's great. Thank you for reminding me of it. Yeah, that's great.
It was a pleasure to hear you read it. So I have one more question before we turn to people here and also on YouTube. And this will take us, I think, to the pedagogical idea that we had been about halfway through the pandemic. We had an exchange that I really valued about teaching and pedagogy and learning. And this has to do with the piece, also an old one, but maybe more memorable for you, which is A Cat in the Throat. Now, I'm not asking you to read it, but I think, can we look at it together?
Yes,
and
of
just,
course.
there might be a passage. It looks like it's on page 156
Okay.
of Meddle English.
Yeah.
So there's...
There you have the spittle, actually. So then we have nearly, that's not foam, like foaming at the mouth or whatever. But
is
actually,
foaming at the mouth.
well, depends how you spit, but it could
Yeah.
definitely sort of, yeah. So that's interesting.
Well,
You
it's
find it there again.
There it is,
Yeah.
and this is at the same period. And of course, the mother tongue, and French is referred to later, so that's one of your mother tongues, one of your two, I guess. There's all kinds of stuff getting stuck in the French,
Yeah.
in the pronunciation, and the mother tongue is causing this spittle that is a dare and dangerous. And then you get into the libidinal, the sexy stuff, the erotic bond, and so forth, and pussycat, and so forth. But what really interests us here when we've talked about this piece is the awareness that has come over you about the relation between the stuttering of your silences, the explicit accentedness of yourself, and the deciding, though you've moved away from French, you're an exophonic poet, you're writing in English, the willingness to keep that thing in your throat that doesn't make you clear, lucid, and fluid. So I wonder if you would read, and I'm improvising here, read the paragraph when you turn to refugee, exilism, and allegiance. You've made a big Bergvallian metaphor out of this thing about speaking. So maybe you'd read the second to last paragraph, as many of us are to the cat in the throat.
Yep.
Thank you.
As many of us are finding ourselves with increased frequency living in countries in which we were not born, or where we are first or second generation citizens, or long-standing residents, or new arrivants, there's an interrupted experience of the past and of the living locale, whether we do or don't experience ourselves as diasporic. Whoever needs, do you want me to continue? Whoever needs to create an allegiance or a correspondence, sometimes seemingly from scratch or from access points hidden from view, to a mixed cultural background, to a complex living jigsaw of multiple markers and untranslated biographical circumstances, will also often question what linguistic belonging means, what fluency entails. To seek this out in the fullness of language, in the connective and lubricated tissues of language and around language, is to speak and work with a cat in the throat.
That's amazing. So you've made this connection between this kind of speaking, which is friction, libidinal, unpleasant, pleasant, and daring and dangerous, and it reaches out to your status as a multilinguistic and translinguistic and transnational artist. That's quite a move that you make in this tiny little piece. And so my question, and we can go anywhere with this, but my question is about what linguistic belonging means and what fluency entails. Because you're really teaching us all, and I say teaching because this is a pedagogical question. We assume that teachers, artists who teach us how to live, are fluent. That is to say, they're clear about what they want us to learn and think. And you are going so against that. So I'd really love to, there's so much there. Take it wherever you want.
Yeah, I mean, plenty. Perhaps to start with something that's not in this text as well, because reading it or looking at it, I remember that it started from a conversation that Gayatri Spivak, the Indian philosopher often based in America, had with Beckett regarding his own translations into French.
Spivak and Beckett conversed.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I can find you the...
That's cool.
And then where she looks at it in relation to... I don't know that the word expectoration is hers or theirs, but it's very much about his own translation into French is to evacuate the English in his work from the English occupation on the Irish language. So there you have the if you like, from the starting point of this idea of the cat in the throat, if I look at the way Beckett describes it, it is this act of resistance, which means that you keep your knot, because that is where the resistance is. And fluency is the standardization, the acceptance of occupation, So from that perspective, for me, it was quite easy to then make the jump, because here you have suddenly a very sort of political statement from Beckett in relation to his own translation practice. So fluency then, in this type of context, means, especially for somebody who then moves across languages, means potentially trying to accept standardized modes of functioning in your language of occupation, or where you place yourself, or of residence. To refuse that is to therefore leave yourself quite open. How do you then define where you are? How do you define how you speak? And so again, you have to go step by step. Again, you have to look at other models, other writers, and other types of residents in the country where you are, who also address their positioning. And of course, there is so much, sort of troubling relation to monolingualism, in relation to post-colonial behavior around English, and wanting to evacuate all languages from that. English needs to be the main language, and there was a point in England where the Home Secretary was saying, speak English at home, and so that type of admonition of really asking people to lose even more. You know, for me, that immediately inscribes a sense of foreignness that is, you know, becomes a foreignness instead of being the possibility of setting up co-created ways of being a citizen. You know, you are asked to sorry if it's this a little bit convoluted, but
there's the pedagogy, co-created ways of being a citizen.
Exactly. So you're asked to lose that and then to adapt to sort of create this fluency, which is a standardization, which is something that is normative, which is something where, you know, we're all supposed to subscribe to. Of course, impossible, as we know. But
nationalistic allegiance,
exactly, and national languages
is a matter of not just language, but the way we speak and sound.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's an anti-fascist idea that it's not simply that I'm from a linguistic culture that defeats fascism. Let's say I'm from a liberal democracy and I defeat fascism. That's not good enough, because you need to then multiply embody the languages, the histories of those languages, the convergence of the languages, because of course the English we speak is very Germanic. So your choice of English, not French or Norwegian, is, pardon the analogy, it's a lot like Beckett's choice to write in French rather than Irish English. And here's the daring one, like Ceylon's choice to write in French instead of German. Are you in that company? I use anti-fascist as a sort of setup for that.
Yes, from the point of view of having to move away, but of course not with the same drama as those two have experienced, but for my personal circumstances, and then I tie it back to me in fact my queer reality, where my familial situation did not allow, it's ironic that goes all the way into the writing condition, but after a while I felt there was too much attached to my familial sort of conditions or conditioning for me to allow myself the freedom that I needed to write and to explore. And so I had to make a move in order to become freer, to be, but also to write. So that is the move. So there is a sense of trauma, and I think trauma is part of how one, in the situation of these writers that you mentioned, of course, is inscribed within that. In a sort of other sort of frame of mind, the whole, in fact, also thinking about Ceylon, the way of reclaiming a number of other languages within one's own language. So, the language is buried within language, within the main language. Get that sort of unearthed in your practice, I think is also, and Beckett also used a lot of dialectical phrases in his work. For me, is also another aspect of going historically down into the languages, or horizontally across to slangs, and and then manifesting a multiplicity. So it's not just languages that have different sort of total different sort of basis, but also within that language itself. So you keep on breaking it up. Yeah.
I'm thinking of last night's reading, which was fabulous, and the most phomic and also the most cat and throat like part is the famous passage from Drift, where you pronounce a bunch of T's and then it gets you to being off course, to be off course. And that is not a reproduction of any traumatic experience that you've had. It is a way of trying to get into the space of the people on that rubber boat, 73 people in a 30-foot boat. And most of them died, they all died, they drowned. And so you are to go off course, to go off course, to go off course. You are enacting the resistance to fluency there as a way of getting us to see that art and an artist, without claiming the trauma, can understand that space between and among languages and states, because they're trying to get from North Africa to Italy, so they're between states. All that between stateness is being reproduced, and you're not claiming that it's your trauma, but your cat in the throat is your base, your home base.
Exactly. It's that embodied moment of language. And by playing with that sort of that sonic reality of language, just down to that micro unit. If it's not even phonemic, it's literally linguistic, or and then becomes literally just a sign, a sound. The T is just a sound. Now that becomes nearly the point of resistance. It's nearly the last point of resistance. And by having that T still there floating and expressed in my throat and played out to you as an audience, we all take part in the drama that language can also play with the body, and that the way it can enact drama simply through the impossibility to speak or the impossibility to even hardly breathe through that.
And it's hard for us hearing
exactly.
it. It's very hard
Absolutely.
for us to hear. Right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of nods here. It's hard for us to hear it. And I'm going to turn to your questions in a minute. Do we have a portable mic ready?
I have it.
Okay. Just one more thought. Going back to the idea of moving from darkness to light, that performance feels like it starts with the utter opacity and impenetrability of the darkness of the single sound and moves to this harsh sweetness of being off course, which is not good but good because it. So there's a darkness to lightness in the way you used your voice there. Which is,
That's
I'm
wonderful
not
to
saying
hear.
anything other than praising you.
No, that's wonderful to hear, and thank you for that. And certainly the fact that it makes you feel uncomfortable is great, because I think when we hear that type of sound, especially with that repetition, you hear it yourself as a vibrational moment. So in a way, you are caught up yourself in that moment,
Yeah.
and in a way, that's where that event takes place
Yeah.
as an event,
Yeah.
somehow that gets shared because of it, because
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you.
really
Yeah.
fun.
Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, so we have people here who might have questions. And how are we doing in the chat? Are people happy in the chat, the YouTube chat?
Caroline, so many people are weighing in on
Do you want to
YouTube
pass some of those
chat.
along?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So many people have said I'm so thankful you have a time that works for my time zone. And a lot of people saying hi. Terry Talty said "Viva Via," which so you're getting
Terry is a mod
poetic
person
shout
in
out.
Colorado, I
Um,
think.
And Erin Moray, a former
wonderful.
Writers House fellow,
Hi, Erin.
left this wonderful comment I thought I would read. She says, "The reading was wonderful. My head is full of war and CB's readings. So well chosen from books I know well. Seem to give me paths forward."
Oh,
so
thank
just
you.
wanted to
Thank
share
you,
that.
Aaron.
Yeah.
Shout out to you,
Yeah,
Aaron.
Absolutely.
we miss you, Erin.
Hope it's not too cold.
Right.
Yeah.
It's probably colder here than in
Yeah, do
Montreal.
you think so? Yeah. But thank you very much. Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear.
Thank you, Lily. So keep those chats coming. We have people in this room. Laynie's been nodding the entire time. I'm pretty sure she has a question, but Anna has a question. Can we get over to Anna? Anna Strong-Safford, back in the house.
Hi. This question's following, I think, from where Al so beautifully brought your conversation kind of to a pause. I'm wondering about the ways that your work in its expression of sort of resistance to fluency and its embrace of the cat in the throat resistance. Another piece of yours that I really love is Say Parsley, which is about the sort of opposite side of that, the danger maybe of that kind of linguistic resistance. So I'm wondering if you could maybe square those two, if at all possible, or talk about Say Parsley.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. In fact, that speak English at home, was a phrase that I also used as this is an installation, one of the installed instances of Say Parsley. Say Parsley actually is nearly at the opposite end of the question of the cat in the throat, because it is the shibboleth. So it is about when you speak, when your way of speaking a word doesn't correspond to the way you are supposed to speak that word. But that's not because you have a cat in the throat. It is, from the point of view of poetics, it's very much because of regional belonging, for example. So it is a biblical story, and it is a murderous story. And the occurrence of Say Parsley is an event that happened in 1937, but it happens on a smaller or larger scales quite frequently, when Haitian Creoles were massacred for not pronouncing the word parsley in the proper rolled R Spanish pronunciation. So that's where the inhabitation of language at its level of the sound becomes murderous. And we know, of course, how disguising one's accent or disguising one's origins is also a way of getting by, of passing in cultures where it could be dangerous to reveal, if you like, one's origins. So that's also how there's an enormous amount of retraining, of immigrants, so that they can feel they can belong in a bit more, safety. But shibboleth is one of the more violent aspects of language intolerance, and the way you get totally tripped over by the way you speak. Yeah.
What's the phrase that you asked people, interviewing people in the UK? Rolling hills, was it?
Oh yes, rolling hills, because of the liquid R of in English is difficult to pronounce for many. In fact, I have a very sort of slightly thin one, and similarly the L for the English L. So because the first time I did that piece was in Exeter, which is in Devon, which has the beautiful rolling hills of that southwest part of the country, it felt like a sort of very good sort of phrase to use. And so I did walk around Exeter asking people to speak that phrase. And in fact, you hear, and although it seems just two words, but you hear so much the differences in regional or more foreign sort of ways of pronouncing rolling hills. So that was enough. These are micro moments, and that could be enough for a shibboleth in another circumstance, and that's what's so scary and horrifying about it. And I did that piece on the back of 9/11 because of what was starting to happen then in relation to Arabs and Arabic inhabitants in Britain, and the way they were starting to be taken on board in relation to all that, as we know. So this was my response to that.
Thank you, Anna. A question here in the room. I think Laynie does have a question. Good morning, Laynie.
Good morning. That was amazing. I've been really enjoying some of the site-specific performances that I've only experienced online, and also the collaborative writing.
Oh, yeah.
And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about those recent projects to share with everyone.
Great. Thank you. Yes, these were projects that I did during lockdown, actually. Night and Refuge, the collaborative writing event you mentioned, was supposed to happen in the square of the British Library in London. So it was supposed to be a real in-person event. It was always supposed to be a collaborative writing event based on the old model, very loosely based on the old model of the Japanese collaborative, writing forms, in which for a number of time, you are placed in situations of being asked to write tercets, couplets, but they do it through very, very strict form. So the two events that I did online, one of them followed a stricter form, where I asked 4 poets to talk about, but all the poets that I invited for both Night and Refuge all have, in fact, a bicultural or bilingual connection to English and therefore to their work as poets. So there is always that tension in the way they, apprehend language and culture and so basically I invite people to write openly on this writing desk that I've created with the support of my team. And for 3 hours, no break, with an audience around, the poets are writing and talking. I tease things out of them. But what started to happen, we also had created a hashtag Night and Refuge. And what started to happen is that writers starting to come into the event and want to share some of the research, that they started reading definitions of tide, what tide was, and where we were, and describing where they were in relation to the time zone of the night, but also creating tercets and couplets and so slowly you could see the poets in the main room starting to get their work also influenced by that exchange. And that became for me, one of the more wonderful and productive aspects of it. So there's the inner circle, if you like, of PPUC, and then this wonderful and more porous element, of the outer circle of the hashtag writers. So now for me, those events can only take place online because they need that traffic of poets and writers wanting to step in and stay in for 20 minutes and disappear again in the middle of the night. So there have been really wonderful events. And also the way somehow the poets invited really become, because again, a bit like today, where I feel so comfortable responding to your questions because we also stay so close to work. That's what happens in these events. It's just the work. So people discuss the text, the words, and then other poets can comment on that. And so it's really productive. It's very much about, but thanks for mentioning those. And in fact, I've continued exploring that in relation to this arts lab, which is a sort of alternative related to pedagogies, but art lab that I run, in which I run workshops that try to look at these different notions of translocal practices or multilingualism or whatever as a way of continuing these ways of operating online positively. Online, because there are aspects of it which create new sociality that we can use that are not as burdensome as what I think many of you experienced during those 2 years.
The new
of
sociality.
teaching.
So that means, as a technical matter, you could, let's say, move to North America and continue doing all your work.
That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let it be known that seems to be
And that
an
sounds like a good
option.
idea.
Anybody out there have a couple of ideas? Speaking of sociality online, we have a question from someone who's watching the live stream. Lily?
So actually, questions are still coming in, but there were 2 really great comments on your reading last night that I thought I would read and formulate into a question, if that's okay, because I think it relates to what we were just talking about. There's a comment from Mark Morgan. He said, "How can we possibly get this by reading? The recitation is great, makes me question reading poetry, or at least accept how different the experience is," meaning reading versus hearing. And then Fred Waugh said, "Fascinating in drift to hear the syllable tracked mycelia-like down and down. We forget to hear them that way." So I just thought, putting these 2 comments together, I would love to hear you talk about your performance and what can we hear versus what can we read.
Absolutely. And thank you. Those great questions, and nice to hear
And
also
Fred,
that Fred was there. That's
it's
wonderful.
8:20 in the morning where Fred has got up, got the coffee going.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, his comment taps back into this idea of embodied listening. It taps back into the fact that you might not hear with your ears, but you start to hear at a different level of more vibrational, pulsional, sort of rhythm. That's why it's uncomfortable. It's nearly like the sort of deep bass that you can get, so it becomes that. So that for me is very much an aspect of it. So then it creates that understanding that's based in embodied experience, somatic knowledge, those kinds of things, even, at the level of that sound. But otherwise, how to read? Yes, well, there is no sense of wanting to subsume either to the other. And from that point of view, my practice is very clearly medievalist, or very, very attached to at least a sense of acknowledging the reality of the text in its printed form. And what it does book-wise, for me, of course, with Drift, is very important. It taps into all the lessons and technologies that poetics have provided, also visually and graphically. But this idea of writing aloud, an idea that comes from Barthes, but that I think is very interesting in the sense of an expanded view on writing, which is also an expanded view on reading. So absolutely he can't read what he heard. But there are other aspects, some of our conversation today, that are, or even the drawings, that I don't then engage in, I'm going to try and read those drawings. That is not, I know this is a practice of reading scores or whatever, but I don't necessarily consider that a score that is soundable. Or for me, it could be, but it's not where I take the question. So yeah, there are all these different environments for reading and writing, and each of them have their own sort of possibilities and challenges and demands. And so yesterday's performance had its own. Yeah. But great question. Yeah.
So in a short bio, people use up a lot of words simply defining you. What kind of artist? Visual artist, concrete poet, sound artist, performance. And yesterday you just said artist would be good.
Yeah.
Just the word artist.
Which might be wrong in the sense that what is crucial to me in my practice is language and languages, and then to take it on as a writer or text-led artist, if you like. So the word artist might be too broad, but it's a little bit a way of acknowledging multiplicity of means. There is a sense whereby in literature and poetry much better than broader literature, but there's still the difficulty of acknowledging, non-book based or installations or performances as equal to other elements within poetic practice. Whereas in the visual arts, you have suddenly they're writers, they're poets, they're photographers, they're video artists, they paint, they do perform, all that is fine. So it's a way of sort of opening up that terrain. But I don't think artist represents enough so there has to be a word.
How about language artist?
Yeah. We could say language artist. Yeah,
I don't know.
No, I don't know.
People would just question that, like, what the hell does that mean?
Perhaps poet, but then that comes attached with so many other things, so that's why. So still.
I mean, the thing is, people know you as a poet, among other things, and then they get this book and they open the first pages. Zach, can you get close on that? And then people say, what the hell did I buy? Why did I pay money for Caroline's drawings? Some people really did say that, right? What are you doing?
There was a great sense of not many people say that, and it didn't sort of become a question. But when people would look at the book with me, just in conversation, the drawings often came up as something that was for some people really, really beautiful. But it wasn't. I don't think they've been examined compositionally. In the fact that there's as many poems as there are drawings, for example, in the book, and that there's a sense of how that moves and is structured. So that felt so there is definitely a sense that there was perhaps a difficulty with being able to decipher the drawing element, that graphic element. For me, it's important, first of all, because of the medieval practice of drawing. So, of course, these are not very neat and tidy, but the medieval practice of having to draw the lines before you can copy the text. So, for me, that came out of these months of spending with this ancient, with these ancient manuscripts. And then, of course, being able, with the pen that we have, to be able in the ink to just start to playing with the shapes and the forms. So that's where they became more rhythmic.
I mean, poets, in the modern tradition of poets write lines. Draw lines, write lines. Those are lines. Some of those are sonnets, 14 of them.
And also, as we know, the long tradition of the connection between the calligraphic and the visual, even in printed form in poetry.
So I have two more questions. One is a kind of a game, and the other is a way of getting you to read from Declaration, the grand, idealistic, sincere, unironic ending of this book. But first, a lightning round. So the game is, I say a name, and you just tell us in a line or two what comes to mind.
Oh God! Okay.
But
I'm very slow,
these are all in Alisoun Sings. So
okay.
Alisoun is enables Caroline, the Caroline in the book, to think about lots of voices.
Yep.
And then along the line, we get references to particular women's voices, women's literary voices, or artistic voices. And so that's going to be the lightning round. So I'm going to say a couple of those names, and we just, really interested in your quick take on these. So first one would be Kathy Acker. This is easy.
Oh, yeah, great. So Kathy Acker, I was unspeakable. I ran into the languages of others. I used to read Kathy Acker a lot, also for that. Was her take on language.
That,
So I'm so happy
that
comes
up. Can you quote those lines?
That is, I was unspeakable, so I ran into the languages of others. That's her way of justifying her process of appropriation, her appropriative writing methodologies.
So let's
that's enough now, I think, because I don't know. Might not
No, but this is a lightning round, so you don't have to.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next, we'll stay in New York for this one. Patti Smith.
Oh, Patti Smith. Yes, so that would be, it could be Gloria, it could be some of her early poetry or songs that move into poetry and in the sort of declamation. So for me, there is that sense of this very beautiful, nearly tribal sense that she always has in relation to poetic delivery, and especially very early on.
This is great. People are taking notes.
Well, no.
This is great. Okay. So,
another nice one.
In Alisoun Sings, Mina Loy gets just a reference to Loy. Some of us wouldn't know it, but it's Mina Loy for sure, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's not Myrna Loy, the actor.
No. This me. In fact, perhaps I should have written. Well, Myrna. Doesn't she use Myrna as well at one point? No, perhaps she's always Mina. But there was Lois as well. She changed her name. So what I love about Mina Loy was, in fact, her early sort of futuristic manifestos that she has.
Yes.
Very, very feminist, and quite angry as well, and multilingual. So she does look at English at that point also in a multilingual way, claims multilinguality for it and for herself. So I thought that was, she's also
I'm glad
been
that she made an
great-
appearance.
Yeah.
Okay, another one whose name is only referred to as Jordan. I'm going to assume it's June Jordan.
June Jordan. She's not only referred as Jordan, she's referred with a quote, a really beautiful quote, "I commit my body and my language."
Yeah.
And she was a poet that I read quite early on as well, also because of her politics and the way she manages to put a sense of being an African-American poet, feminist, and trying to identify the different identities. Which is an identity that leads in relation to my feminism? Is it first that I'm a black woman feminist? Is it first that I'm a feminist and then I'm black? So those very sort of complicated questions are very much at the heart of some of the essays she wrote in Encore, and that was a book I really loved. And that beautiful line, "I commit my body and my language," I think is really...
That's nice. This game is great because it's just nice to have those, in effect, annotations.
Yeah.
By the way, Alisoun Sings has, in effect, annotations.
Yeah,
It
they're
has
all
a
at the back.
reading list and
Yeah,
so forth.
yeah.
All right, one more of these and then a
Okay.
final question.
Yeah.
Okay. Clarice Lispector.
Clarice Lispector. She's in the book as well in more than her name. And that might... Is it Hour of the Star? Suddenly I do have a gap. It is. That beautiful, the world... Oh, what is it? The world... Thank you. The whole
Nice.
world began with a yes. And then she moves into the atomic aspect, and it's such a beautiful start to that. It's not a novel really, but that amazing book of hers. So that was the closing lines, and I invited a few poets to translate it into different languages of a piece that I wrote, a sound work that I wrote after through the Global Women's March in whenever that was, 2000.
January 21st, 2017.
Exactly. And then I used her yes as a refrain and those translation as a refrain. Yeah.
That's great.
And you know,
I'm
it's
glad-
funny because a bit later on I read Anne Boyer's No, and I thought, well, that is such an interesting piece. So there's that wonderful sense of having a very affirmative no, and then also thinking about the very productive, generative yes of Clarice Lispector. So, yeah.
Can I do one last lightning round name? It's not appearing in the books so far as I've seen, but so sorry, it comes from left field. Gertrude Stein.
Oh, Gertrude Stein, yes. That's nearly Gertrude Stein and Charles Bernstein, because it is really the way he talks about her as on mastery of language. And that for me has always remained. I mean, first of all, Tender Buttons and the section of rooms was the model for my first installation and my first book, Éclat. So it was my way, or her negative space, the way
Right.
she described nobody through the negative space provided by another object, I thought was amazing. And then this whole idea of on mastery of language. So yeah, she's also very
Yeah,
much at
okay.
in the deeper root of things. So yeah.
How'd we do? We scored 100, I think, right? So finally, Caroline Bergvall, it would be great if you would read a couple of pages from Declaration. I'm thinking of page 117 to 18. You read part of this last night, but it's worth a reprise because I'm thinking from yes, it is difficult down to the
Okay. Yeah.
and please set it up any way you like. But this is very hopeful. I mean, Alisoun is a pain in the butt, and Caroline is a little overwhelmed by her sometimes. But in the end, this convergence of these two leads us to some political hope, which is, I think, on this very morning, probably just a good thing to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. Also, perhaps to say that she's a pain in the butt, but she
bully.
initially, but then she also has ways of talking about fashion that have to do with rethinking the industry of fashion and thinking about recycling, reusing, so the localism that comes out of her then. So there's aspects of Alisoun that becomes about contemporary ways of living and of how to think about industry, so that I find...
Wasn't Caroline already an eco-fashion person before meeting Alisoun?
I think that what's happened with the fashion industry, the awareness we have of what it costs to make a T-shirt,
Right.
because I did a lot of research around
All that water.
Yeah, for me, that definitely wasn't aware, like I am now, of how we, and that's why I mentioned this artist. I can't remember her full name, but Martin, who decided little brown dress, who decides for 1 year to wear this one and to recycle and rethink it and redo it. Yeah, which I think is such an amazing project, and lots of other projects that try and rethink fashion from a very local, nearly home-based sort of way of
Slow clothing.
Slow clothing. Yeah,
clothing.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and
Thank
we know
you.
that for Alisoun, clothes was so important, and so is her hat. You know, so it was important that she now, in the 21st century, comes to still loving hats because it's that proud top, but also acknowledging other dimensions for clothing. Yeah. So, just wanted to defend
No, I'm glad
her-
you got that
just
in there
defend
because we
her,
didn't
but-
get to that topic.
Exactly.
I not being so up on slow clothing. But so we're going to conclude today and conclude Caroline's time as a Writers' House Fellow with this passage at the end of Alisoun Sings.
Yes, it is a difficult yet not impossible rethink. Our ways of living, loving, breathing, giving, sitting, ploughing, watering, earning, feeding, bumping, dreaming, kneeling, sharing, flighting, transform with Loki, breathe with Shakti, make a concerted, desperate purpose of simpler, connected living, and get into bed with the earth like a lovely and brave Mendieta. For in this, my friendly company, we are alle her kindren, alle in a melee, bearded, unbearded aliking, and alle we must sharen the call-out and the song. Each of us updreamed as we be from her round and sacred ground.
Caroline Bergvall.
Thank you. Thank you, Al.
That was
Thank you.
so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for watching, many people. Fred, I hope you get your second cup of coffee.
Erin,
To
I
those
hope you're
watching on live stream, we've been talking about these two books, and if I had a third hand,
Hang
I
on.
would hold up Meddle English. There it is. These three books, they're available online near you. And then for people here in the room, we have copies. And I know that Caroline would stay around for a few minutes to greet you and inscribe your copy. Thank you. Thank you, Caroline,
Thank you
for
again so much.
being a Writers' House Fellow. Thank you, Lily, for coordinating your 10th year of Writers' House Fellows. And thanks to Zach Gardner for doing a super job on video and audio. So thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Great.